In the shadows of New York City's bustling streets, where families are meant to find safety and solace, a chilling pattern emerges, one that reveals the unimaginable betrayal hidden behind closed doors. No one could have foreseen how ordinary lives could spiral into such profound darkness until the evidence surfaced, exposing the harrowing truths that shocked communities and investigators alike. Welcome to Echo Case File Channel, where we delve into the real stories that define true crime. Today, we begin our exploration of New York's most disturbing cases involving fathers who crossed unthinkable lines. Let's start with our first case. Case 1, Davon Morrison. It was a cold evening in late January of 2026 when the quiet hum of a Queens homeless shelter was shattered by a tragedy that would haunt the city. One, the Manhattan View Hotel in Long Island City, repurposed as a shelter for those in need, became the scene of a father's unimaginable act against his own flesh and blood. Davon Morrison, a 30-year-old man struggling with his own demons, was staying there with his 2-year-old son, Maliek Williams. What unfolded that night would lead to charges of murder and a spotlight on the fragility of young lives in vulnerable situations. Morrison had been given temporary custody of Maliek amid a contentious family dynamic. The boy's mother, who had been fighting for full custody, had voiced concerns about Morrison's behavior in the past. But on that fateful Friday, January 30th, the two were alone in room 704. According to court documents, Morrison admitted to being heavily intoxicated that evening. So he later told investigators that he had no clear memory of what happened next, but the evidence painted a devastating picture. Prosecutors alleged that in a fit of rage or frustration, Morrison severely beat his toddler son, inflicting injuries that included multiple brain bleeds, a fractured pelvis, a lacerated liver, and a blown right pupil. Signs of extreme trauma that no child should ever endure. The assault didn't end with immediate help. Instead, Morrison noticed the bruises on Maliek's face the next morning, but chose not to seek medical attention. For 3 agonizing days, the child suffered in silence as his condition worsened. On Saturday, Morrison woke to see the extent of the damage, but still delayed any action. By Monday, February 1st, he decided to drop Maliek off at a relative's home in East Harlem. To conceal the boy's battered state, Morrison hid him in the undercarriage of a stroller, wrapping him in layers to avoid prying eyes. When he arrived at the NYCHA apartment building near 102nd Street and 3rd Avenue, relatives immediately spotted the injuries and called 911. Emergency responders rushed Maliek to New York Presbyterian Hospital, where doctors placed him on a ventilator in the intensive care unit. The toddler fought for his life, but the damage was too severe. His mother, heartbroken and desperate, took to social media, pleading for prayers. "My baby is fighting for his life in the ICU. Please, I can't do anything but pray." Prosecutors detailed how Maliek's small body showed signs of prolonged suffering, with swelling in his brain and a damaged brainstem that left little hope for recovery. Meanwhile, law enforcement moved swiftly. Morrison was arrested that Tuesday night on charges of attempted murder and 2 counts of assault. He appeared in court the following day, pleading not guilty and being held without bail. In his statement to police, Morrison confessed to seeing the bruises, but claimed his intoxication clouded his judgment. "I must have hit him, but I don't remember," he reportedly said. The Queens District Attorney's Office, led by Melinda Katz, vowed to upgrade the charges if the worst happened. Tragically, it did. On Wednesday, February 3rd, Maliek succumbed to his injuries and was pronounced dead late that evening. His family confirmed the loss to local media, igniting public outrage and calls for justice. The investigation revealed more about Morrison's life. He had been residing in the shelter due to homelessness. Aaron and sources indicated a history of instability. Domestic violence advocates like Stephanie McGraw from the group We All Really Matter highlighted how the mother had cried out for help from child welfare officials and law enforcement, but her pleas seemed to fall on deaf ears. She warned everybody, ACS, the courts, NYPD, and now her cry was not heard, McGraw stated. The case drew parallels to the vulnerabilities in New York's shelter system, where oversight can sometimes falter amid overwhelming demand. As the charges were upgraded to murder, Morrison's arraignment became a focal point. In court, Assistant District Attorney Lauren Muldoon described the horrific injuries in detail, emphasizing Morrison's depraved indifference to his son's life. The judge ordered him held without bail, and a trial date was set for later that year. When community members rallied outside the courthouse, demanding accountability not just for Morrison, but for the systems that failed to intervene sooner. Maliek's mother, in her grief, shared photos of her vibrant son on Instagram, remembering him as a joyful child whose light was extinguished too soon. The trial unfolded in the summer of 2026, with witnesses recounting the sequence of events. Relatives testified about discovering Maliek's condition, and medical experts explained the fatal nature of the injuries, noting that prompt care might have made a difference. Morrison's defense argued intoxication as a mitigating factor, but the jury wasn't swayed. After deliberations, they found him guilty of second-degree murder, assault, and related charges. Sentencing came in September, with Morrison receiving 25 years to life, a term that reflected the severity of his actions. The judge remarked on the betrayal of parental trust, stating, "You had a duty to protect him, and instead, you destroyed him." This case sent ripples through Queens and beyond, prompting reviews of child protection protocols in shelters. But for Maliek's family, no policy change could bring back their little boy. His story remains a stark reminder of the hidden dangers that can lurk in places meant for refuge. Now moving to our second case in this episode, Case 2, Shaquan Butler. Just a few years earlier, in the fall of 2022, another Queens shelter became the backdrop for a father's deadly rage. The old Pan American Hotel in Elmhurst, converted into housing for homeless families, housed Shaquan Butler, a 26-year-old man, along with his 3-year-old son, Shaquan Butler Jr., the child's 2 younger siblings, and their mother. What started as a temporary haven turned into a house of horrors on November 13th, when young Shaquan's short life came to a violent end. According to prosecutors, Butler had been subjecting his son to ongoing abuse. Doctors later found evidence of prolonged mistreatment, including old fractures and scars that contradicted Butler's claims of an isolated incident. On that Sunday, emergency calls brought responders to the shelter, where they found the toddler unresponsive. He was rushed to a nearby hospital, but efforts to revive him failed. The medical examiner ruled the death a homicide, caused by severe blunt force trauma to the head and torso, injuries consistent with a brutal beating. Butler was arrested the following Tuesday and charged with second-degree murder and manslaughter. Investigators pieced together the events. Butler claimed the boy had fallen, but autopsy results told a different story. Bruises covered his body, and internal injuries pointed to repeated assaults. The Queens District Attorney's Office, under Melinda Katz, described it as one of the most egregious cases of child abuse they had encountered. This defenseless child endured unimaginable pain at the hands of the person who should have protected him, Katz said in a statement. The family had been in the shelter system for months, and neighbors reported hearing cries and disturbances from their unit. Butler's partner, the children's mother, was not charged in the death but faced scrutiny for the environment. And the 2 younger siblings showed signs of abuse as well, leading to their removal by child services. Butler's arrest made headlines, with community leaders calling for better monitoring in shelters. As the case progressed to trial in 2025, a jury heard testimony from medical experts, shelter staff, and family members. Prosecutors presented evidence of Butler's history, including prior incidents of violence. The defense argued lack of intent, suggesting the injuries were accidental, but the physical evidence was overwhelming. After a tense deliberation, the jury convicted Butler on August 7th of second-degree murder, first-degree assault, and endangering the welfare of a child. Sentencing occurred on September 23rd, with Butler receiving 32 years to life in prison. The judge, in handing down the term, what noted the depraved nature of the acts and the betrayal of paternal responsibility. "You took the life of your own son and harmed his siblings," the judge stated. "Society demands accountability for such horrors." Katz's office emphasized the conviction as a step toward justice for young Shaquan, whose name now echoes in advocacy for child protection reforms. Butler's appeal was filed shortly after, but it did little to ease the pain for those who knew the boy. Relatives remembered him as a curious toddler with a bright smile, forever lost to a father's unchecked anger. This case, like Morrison's, underscored the urgent need for vigilance in protecting New York's most vulnerable children. As we wrap up this first part of our series on New York's most evil fathers, remember to like this video if you found it compelling. Drop a comment with your thoughts on these cases and hit that subscribe button for more true crime stories from Echo Case File, Channel Case 3, Luciano Fratellin. The story begins in the fall of 2025 in the small town of Essex in Essex County, New York, a region more accustomed to the rustle of leaves in the Adirondack winds than the wail of police sirens. Luciano Fratellin, a 42-year-old construction worker originally from Italy but a longtime resident of the area, lived in a modest two-story home on a tree-lined street. To outsiders, he appeared as an everyday dad, often seen playing catch with his daughter in the yard or attending local school events. But beneath that veneer lay a turbulent family history marked by simmering resentments and escalating conflicts. Melina Fratellin, Luciano's 9-year-old daughter, was a bright and energetic girl with a passion for drawing and animals. She split her time between her father's home and her mother's apartment in nearby Lake Placid, following a custody arrangement that had been in place since her parents' divorce 3 years earlier. The split had been acrimonious, with accusations flying back and forth in family court. Luciano's ex-wife, Maria Rossi, had repeatedly filed complaints about his temper, citing incidents where he had shouted at Melina over minor issues like homework or bedtime. Court records from the Essex County Family Court showed that Maria had sought full custody multiple times, but judges had ruled in favor of shared parenting, believing Luciano's assurances that he was committed to being a better father. On the afternoon of September 28th, 2025, Melina arrived at her father's house for what was supposed to be a weekend visit. Neighbors later told investigators they heard nothing unusual that evening, just the typical sounds of a family settling in for dinner. But inside the home, tensions boiled over. According to Luciano's eventual confession, the argument started innocently enough over Melina's reluctance to eat her vegetables, but it quickly escalated when she expressed a desire to live full-time with her mother. She said she didn't want to be with me anymore, Luciano reportedly told detectives, his voice breaking during the interrogation. In a fit of rage, he grabbed her by the throat, squeezing until she stopped struggling. Panic set in almost immediately, but instead of calling for help, Luciano spent the next several hours trying to cover his tracks. He positioned Melina's body in her bedroom, arranging it to look like she had hanged herself from the closet door using a belt from her own wardrobe. Then around midnight, he dialed 911, his voice trembling as he claimed to have discovered her that way after checking on her before bed. Emergency responders from the Essex County Sheriff's Office arrived within minutes, but it was too late. Melina was pronounced dead at the scene. The initial assessment suggested suicide, a heartbreaking but not unheard of tragedy for a child under stress from a broken home. However, the medical examiner's preliminary findings raised red flags. Petechial hemorrhaging in her eyes, bruising around her neck that didn't match the belt's width, and defensive wounds on her hands and arms, including scratches that contained skin cells later matched to Luciano via DNA testing. The investigation kicked into high gear the following morning. Detectives from the New York State Police Bureau of Criminal Investigation were called in to assist local authorities. They canvassed the neighborhood, speaking to neighbors who recalled hearing raised voices around dinner time. One witness, a retiree living next door, mentioned seeing Luciano pacing in his backyard late that night, appearing agitated. Phone records obtained through a warrant showed a series of deleted text messages between Luciano and Maria earlier that day, where he accused her of turning Melina against him. Forensic teams scoured the house, finding traces of blood on a kitchen towel that Luciano claimed was from a cooking accident, but tests confirmed it was Melina's. Luciano was brought in for questioning on September 30th. At first, he stuck to his story, tearfully insisting that Melina had been depressed and that he blamed himself for not noticing the signs sooner. But as detectives presented the inconsistencies, the mismatched bruises, the DNA evidence, the lack of any suicide note or prior indications of mental health struggles, his facade cracked. After 6 hours in the interrogation room, he broke down and confessed. "I didn't mean to kill her," he sobbed, according to the official transcript. "It was just a moment of anger. I loved her more than anything." Prosecutors from the Essex County District Attorney's Office wasted no time, charging him with second-degree murder, manslaughter in the first degree, and tampering with physical evidence. And the news of the arrest spread like wildfire through the tight-knit community. Local media outlets, including the Adirondack Daily Enterprise and WPTZ News Channel 5, covered the story extensively, with headlines screaming, "Father accused in daughter's strangulation death." Vigils were held at Melina's school, where classmates left drawings and stuffed animals in her memory. Maria Rossi spoke publicly for the first time at a press conference, her voice steady despite the grief. "Melina was my world. She deserved a father who protected her, not one who took her life." Advocacy groups like the New York State Coalition Against Domestic Violence pointed to the case as a stark example of how custody battles can turn deadly when warning signs are ignored. As the case headed to trial in January of 2026, the prosecution built a compelling narrative around Luciano's pattern of controlling behavior. Witnesses included Maria, who testified about years of emotional abuse, and a psychologist who explained how Luciano's untreated anger issues likely contributed to the outburst. The defense team argued for a reduced charge, claiming temporary insanity due to the stress of the custody dispute and Luciano's own childhood trauma from an abusive father in Italy. They presented expert testimony on post-traumatic stress disorder, suggesting that Luciano blacked out during the attack. But the jury, after hearing the graphic details of Melina's final moments reconstructed through forensic evidence, deliberated for only 2 days before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Sentencing took place on March 15, 2026. The courtroom was packed with Melina's relatives and community members as the judge handed down a sentence of 25 years to life for the murder charge, with additional time for the other offenses to run concurrently. "Your actions were not those of a loving father, but of a man consumed by selfishness and rage," the judge intoned, his words echoing in the silent room. Luciano showed little emotion, staring straight ahead as he was led away in handcuffs. Appeals were filed almost immediately, but as of now, they have not overturned the conviction. Melina's death prompted a review of family court procedures in Essex County, with calls for mandatory psychological evaluations in high-conflict custody cases. Her story, though tragic, has become a catalyst for change, ensuring that other children might be spared similar fates. Yet for those who knew her, the loss remains profound. A young life snuffed out in the place she should have felt safest. Transitioning now to our next harrowing account, we move from the rural north to the suburban sprawl of Long Island, where a former law enforcement officer's authority masked a regime of terror within his own home. No one suspected the horrors unfolding behind the walls of a seemingly affluent household until a child's desperate cries for help went unanswered one final time, exposing a pattern of abuse that defied comprehension. Case 4. Michael Valva. The events leading to this tragedy trace back to January 17, 2020, in the town of Center Moricha on Long Island's South Shore. Michael Valva, a 43-year-old transit police officer with the New York Police Department, lived in a spacious home with his fiancée, Angelina Polina, and his 3 sons from a previous marriage, Thomas, aged 8, Anthony, aged 10, and Andrew, aged 6. All 3 boys were on the autism spectrum, adding layers of vulnerability to their already precarious situation. Valva had gained full custody of the children in 2017 after a contentious divorce from their mother, Justina Zubko Valva, who had accused him of abuse, but was dismissed by the courts as unreliable. That frigid winter morning, with temperatures plummeting to 19 degrees Fahrenheit outside, Valva called 911 around 9:40 in the morning. He reported that his son Thomas had fallen in the driveway while running to catch the school bus and was unresponsive. And paramedics from the Suffolk County Emergency Medical Services arrived to find Thomas in cardiac arrest, his body temperature a chilling 76 degrees, far below normal. Despite frantic efforts to revive him at Long Island Community Hospital, Thomas was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The initial report listed the cause as an accidental fall, but the Suffolk County Medical Examiner's autopsy told a far grimmer tale. Death by acute hypothermia, compounded by chronic malnutrition and signs of repeated physical abuse, including bruises, abrasions, and healed fractures. Investigators from the Suffolk County Police Department's Homicide Squad descended on the Valva home, uncovering a trove of evidence that painted a picture of systematic torment. Home security cameras, which Valva and Polina had installed throughout the property, and captured audio and video of the night before. In one chilling recording, Thomas and his brother Anthony can be heard begging for blankets in the unheated garage where they were forced to sleep on the concrete floor without mattresses or covers. "I'm cold," Thomas whimpered repeatedly. Valva's response, caught on tape, was callous. "You know why you're cold, because you're a piece of garbage." Polina laughed in the background, adding, "That's what happens when you don't behave." The garage temperature had dropped to near freezing, and the boys had been hosed down with cold water earlier as punishment for soiling themselves, a common occurrence due to their autism and the withholding of bathroom access. Further digging revealed that this was no isolated incident. Text messages between Valva and Polina, subpoenaed from their phones, detailed a campaign of cruelty. They referred to the boys as animals and zombies, discussing plans to deny them food as discipline. School records showed Thomas had lost significant weight, dropping from a healthy percentile to emaciated. Teachers had reported concerns to Child Protective Services multiple times, but investigations were closed without action, partly due to Valva's status as a police officer, which lent him credibility. Justina, the mother, had filed over a dozen complaints with family court, including photos of bruises on the children, but judges sided with Valva, even ordering her to pay child support while restricting her visitation. Valva and Polina were arrested on February 4, 2020, charged with second-degree murder and 4 counts each of endangering the welfare of a child. And the arrest made national headlines, with outlets like the New York Times, CNN, and Newsday detailing the shocking abuse. Public outrage surged when audio from the home cameras was leaked, prompting protests outside the Suffolk County Courthouse. Suffolk County District Attorney Timothy Sinai held a press conference vowing justice. This was not an accident. This was deliberate, prolonged torture that ended in a child's death. The surviving brothers, Anthony and Andrew, were placed in foster care and later reunited with their mother after emergency court orders. The trials were held separately to avoid prejudice. Polina's began in March of 2022. Prosecutors played the garage audio for the jury, eliciting gas in the courtroom. The witnesses included neighbors who heard cries from the house and school staff who noticed the boys' deteriorating condition. Polina's defense claimed she was under Valva's influence, but the jury convicted her after 5 days, finding her equally culpable. She was sentenced on December 6, 2022, to 25 years to life. Valva's trial followed in October of the same year. As a former officer, he faced additional scrutiny, with internal NYPD investigations revealing he had been demoted for unrelated misconduct. On the stand, Valva denied intent, blaming Thomas's autism for behavioral issues and claiming the garage was a tough love measure. But the evidence was damning. Medical experts testified that Thomas's hypothermia could only result from prolonged exposure, not a brief fall. After a month-long trial, the jury deliberated for 8 hours before convicting him on November 18, 2022. Sentencing came on December 8, 25 years to life, with the judge labeling him a monster in uniform. The case spurred legislative changes, including Thomas's law in New York, mandating better training for judges in recognizing abuse in custody cases and faster responses from child services. Justina Zubko Valva became an advocate, founding the Thomas Valva Foundation to support abused children. Yet the scars remain. Thomas's brothers continue therapy, and the community grapples with how such evil went unchecked for so long. Case 5. Ryan Cato. The tragedy began to unfold in the early months of 2021. Amid the lingering shadows of a global pandemic that had already strained countless families across New York City, Ryan Cato, a 34-year-old man with a checkered past, had recently moved into a modest apartment in Harlem's St. Nicholas Houses, a public housing complex known for its tight-knit residents, but also its struggles with poverty and crime. Cato was living with his girlfriend, a single mother trying to make ends meet, and her 10-year-old son, Aiden Wolf, a bright-eyed boy who loved playing video games and dreamed of becoming a basketball star. To outsiders, Cato seemed like a stabilizing presence, helping with household chores and occasionally taking Aiden to the nearby playground. But behind closed doors, a far more sinister dynamic was at play. The court records and witness accounts later revealed that Cato's relationship with Aiden was fraught from the start. Having lived together for only a few months, Cato reportedly viewed the boy as a burden, often complaining about his behavior in text messages to friends. Prosecutors from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office would describe how Cato routinely subjected Aiden to physical punishments for minor infractions, like not cleaning his room or talking back. Bruises began appearing on the child's arms and legs, but when questioned by school officials, Aiden would shrug it off, saying he fell while playing. His mother, caught in the web of a tumultuous relationship, either didn't notice or chose to ignore the warning signs, according to testimony during the trial. So the fatal escalation occurred over a harrowing 24-hour period in early March of 2021. On March 5th, neighbors in the apartment building reported hearing loud banging and thuds coming from the unit, accompanied by cries that echoed through the thin walls. These sounds were not uncommon in the dense housing project, but they were particularly intense that evening. The next day, March the 6th, the disturbances continued into the afternoon. Around 2:20 in the afternoon, Aiden's mother dialed 911, her voice frantic as she reported her son was unresponsive. Cato allegedly snatched the phone from her, speaking to the dispatcher himself and claiming Aiden had collapsed suddenly. When first responders from the New York City Fire Department and police arrived at the scene, they found a heartbreaking sight: 10-year-old Aiden lying naked on the living room floor, his body covered in bruises, without a pulse or signs of breathing. Paramedics immediately began cardiopulmonary resuscitation, working desperately to revive him as they rushed him to Harlem Hospital. Doctors and nurses in the emergency room fought for hours to save his life, administering medications and using advanced life support measures. Despite their efforts, Aiden was pronounced dead at 4:20 that afternoon. The medical examiner's initial examination revealed extensive trauma: multiple contusions across his torso, head injuries consistent with blunt force, and internal bleeding that pointed to a prolonged beating rather than a single incident. The New York Police Department's investigation moved swiftly. Detectives from the Harlem precinct interviewed neighbors who corroborated the sounds of abuse, one recalling hearing Cato shout obscenities at the boy the night before. Cato was taken into custody late that Sunday, March the 7th, initially charged with murder in the second degree and endangering the welfare of a child. Police Commissioner Dermot Shea addressed the media, calling the case a stark reminder of the hidden horrors of child abuse. "This young boy endured unimaginable suffering," he stated, his tone grave. Aiden's biological father, who had been estranged but maintained contact, spoke at a vigil held in the boy's honor, tearfully remembering his son's infectious laugh and love for sports. "He was just a kid with so much potential," he said, as community members lit candles outside the apartment building. As details emerged, the public learned more about the extent of the torment. Prosecutors alleged that Cato had tortured Aiden for months, using belts, fists, and other objects to inflict pain as a form of discipline. Autopsy results confirmed the cause of death as fatal child abuse syndrome, with injuries including fractured ribs from older assaults and fresh hemorrhaging in the brain. The Manhattan District Attorney at the time, Cyrus Vance Jr., upgraded the charges to reflect the depraved indifference Cato showed toward the child's life. Community activists from groups like the Harlem Children's Zone rallied for better child protection services, pointing out that school reports of Aiden's bruises had been filed, but not followed up aggressively enough due to pandemic-related backlogs. Cato's trial didn't commence until late January of 2025, delayed by legal motions and the complexities of gathering evidence. In the courtroom of New York State Supreme Court Justice Curtis Farber, prosecutors painted a vivid picture of the abuse. Witnesses included emergency room doctors who described Aiden's emaciated state upon arrival, neighbors who testified to the ongoing disturbances, and forensic experts who analyzed the bruising patterns to show they were inflicted over time. One particularly damning piece of evidence was a series of text messages from Cato's phone, where he bragged to a friend about teaching the kid a lesson just days before the fatal beating. The defense argued that Cato lacked intent, claiming the injuries resulted from rough play gone wrong and that he was under stress from financial troubles. They called character witnesses who described him as a hard-working man trying to step up as a father figure. But the jury, after deliberating for about a day, wasn't convinced. On March the 6th, 2025, eerily the fourth anniversary of Aiden's death, they returned a guilty verdict on all counts. One count of murder in the second degree, and one count of endangering the welfare of a child. Sentencing came on April 25, 2025, in a packed courtroom filled with Aiden's relatives and supporters. District Attorney Alvin Bragg read a victim impact statement detailing the boy's suffering, emphasizing how Cato's actions robbed a community of a promising young life. Justice Farber, addressing Cato directly, delivered a scathing rebuke. "For that which you have done, you simply deserve no mercy." He sentenced Cato, now 38, to 25 years to life in state prison, ensuring he would spend decades behind bars. As Cato was led away in handcuffs, Aiden's mother, who faced no charges but lost custody of her other children, sat silently, her face etched with regret. The case sparked reforms in how child abuse reports are handled in New York City schools and housing authorities, with new protocols for faster interventions. Vigils and memorials continue to honor Aiden, his story a cautionary tale of the dangers lurking in dysfunctional homes. Yet for those who knew him, the pain lingers, a young boy's light extinguished by a man who should have protected him. Shifting our focus now to another devastating incident in Manhattan, where the promise of family unity dissolved into a nightmare of neglect that defied comprehension. In a city apartment stocked with provisions, a young child's cries for sustenance went unheeded, until a late-night emergency revealed the skeletal frame of innocence betrayed, prompting a reckoning for those entrusted with his care. Case 6. Laren Maudlin. This harrowing tale centers on the fall of 2024 in a Harlem apartment on Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard, a bustling thoroughfare lined with historic brownstones and modern high-rises. Laren Maudlin, a 25-year-old aspiring gamer and occasional delivery driver, lived there with his partner, Netavia Ragsdale, 26, and their 4 children, 7-year-old, 6-year-old, 5-year-old, and the youngest, 4-year-old Yamek Maudlin. The family had been together for years, navigating the challenges of low-income living in one of the city's most vibrant yet economically strained neighborhoods. Neighbors describe Maudlin as quiet and unassuming, often seen glued to his phone or console, while Ragsdale appeared as a concerned mother who sometimes checked on other kids in the building. But beneath this facade lay a pattern of extreme deprivation that prosecutors would later call a stain on our collective conscience. According to court documents, for approximately 2 years leading up to the tragedy, Maudlin and Ragsdale systematically restricted their children's access to food, treating it as a privilege rather than a necessity. Cabinets and refrigerators in the apartment were secured with zip ties, padlocks, and other barriers, ensuring the kids couldn't reach even basic staples. The parents, however, purchased and consumed meals for themselves daily, ordering takeout or cooking portions that excluded the children. Investigators found ample food supplies during a search, canned goods, snacks, and perishables stockpiled out of reach, highlighting the deliberate nature of the neglect. Yamek, the youngest, suffered the most visibly. Described by relatives as once a playful toddler with a mischievous grin, he began wasting away, his body shrinking as malnutrition took hold. Maudlin later told detectives he hadn't noticed the boy's declining health because he was preoccupied with video games and social media, a statement that drew widespread condemnation. The other siblings showed similar signs: sunken eyes, protruding bones, and developmental delays. School records for the older children noted frequent absences and concerns about their thinness, but reports to the Administration for Children's Services were investigated and closed without removal, possibly due to the parents' ability to present a united front during home visits. The crisis culminated on the evening of October 13, 2024. Around 7:42 in the evening, Maudlin dialed 911, reporting that Yamek was unresponsive and struggling to breathe. Emergency medical technicians arrived to find the 4-year-old emaciated on the living room floor, his tiny frame weighing just 19 pounds, less than half the average for his age. He was rushed to a nearby hospital where doctors administered end-of-life care when noting severe organ failure due to prolonged starvation. Despite interventions, Yamike passed away at approximately 5:50 the next morning, October 14th. The medical examiner ruled the death a homicide caused by malnutrition and dehydration, with contributing factors including untreated infections from weakened immunity. In the aftermath, Maudlin and Ragsdale were arrested within days. Initially charged with criminally negligent homicide and endangering the welfare of a child, the case escalated as evidence mounted. The surviving siblings, also severely malnourished, were hospitalized and placed in foster care, their conditions slowly improving with proper nutrition. Prosecutors from Alvin Bragg's office unsealed an indictment on November 6, 2024, charging both parents with murder in the second degree, 4 counts of assault in the first degree, manslaughter in the second degree, criminally negligent homicide, and 4 counts of endangering the welfare of a child. The charges reflected the depraved indifference they showed toward their children's lives, treating them as afterthoughts in their own routines. Mullin's arraignment occurred on November 13, amid reports that he had been assaulted by fellow inmates at Rikers Island, sustaining injuries that required medical attention. His lawyer argued for bail, citing Maudlin's lack of prior criminal history, but the judge denied it, citing the severity of the allegations. In court, Assistant District Attorney Jordan Arnold detailed the zip-tied cabinets and Maudlin's admission about his distractions, painting him as a father who prioritized personal entertainment over parental duty. Anyway, this was not an accident of poverty, Arnold stated. This was willful starvation in a home full of food. Community response was swift and emotional. A memorial service for Yamik drew hundreds to a local park, where balloons were released and songs sung in his memory. Advocacy groups like the New York Foundling called for systemic changes in child welfare monitoring, highlighting how multiple red flags, school reports, neighbor concerns were missed. Ragsdale, arraigned earlier, faced similar scrutiny, with prosecutors noting her role in enforcing the food restrictions. As of early 2026, the trials are pending, with both parents pleading not guilty and facing potential life sentences if convicted on the top charges. A Maudlin story has ignited debates on parental responsibility and the failures of social safety nets in urban environments. For Yamik's extended family, who have spoken out about their unsuccessful attempts to intervene, the loss is irreparable. A child's life ended not by violence but by the slow, cruel erosion of neglect from the one man who should have nourished him. As we conclude this third chapter on Echo Case File Channel, if these accounts have left you reflecting on the fragility of trust, please like the video, share your insights in the comments below, and smash that subscribe button to never miss an update on our true crime explorations. Case 7, Arius Williams. The events that led to this unthinkable loss began in the spring of 2025 in the bustling borough of the Bronx, a place where diverse communities thrive amid the challenges of urban life. Arius Williams, a 20-year-old man navigating the complexities of young adulthood, shared custody of his 2-year-old son, Montrell Williams, with the child's mother, Sierra Carroll. Montrell, affectionately known as Trey Trey to those who loved him, was a lively toddler with an infectious smile and boundless energy, often seen toddling around playgrounds or clinging to his mother's side. Williams and Carroll had a tumultuous relationship marked by arguments and separations, but they had managed to co-parent under a court-ordered arrangement that allowed Williams visitation rights. However, underlying tensions simmered, fueled by Williams' reported history of domestic issues and Carroll's growing concerns about his stability. On the afternoon of May 26th, at her 2025, a seemingly ordinary day turned catastrophic. Williams had picked up Montrell from Carroll's home earlier that morning for what was supposed to be a routine outing. Carroll, a 22-year-old working mother, kissed her son goodbye, expecting to see him later that evening. As the hours passed without word from Williams, Carroll's worry escalated. She began calling and texting him repeatedly, but her messages went unanswered. By evening, panic set in, and she contacted the New York Police Department to report Montrell missing. According to later court filings, Carroll informed officers of Williams' erratic behavior and provided details about his last known location, emphasizing the urgency due to the child's young age. Tragically, the response was not as swift as she hoped. Police allegedly downplayed her concerns, with one officer reportedly responding dismissively when she pressed for immediate action. Meanwhile, Williams had taken Montrell to the waterfront area near the Bruckner Expressway, a spot overlooking the East River's swift currents. Surveillance footage from nearby cameras, which would later become pivotal evidence, captured the pair walking along the pathway. Prosecutors from the Bronx District Attorney's Office described the chilling sequence. Williams, appearing agitated, lifted the squirming toddler and hurled him over the railing into the churning waters below. Montrell, still very much alive according to autopsy findings, plunged into the river, his small body succumbing to drowning amid the cold, relentless flow. Williams then fled the scene, leaving no trace of his actions until the investigation caught up. The search for Montrell began in earnest the following day, May 27, when divers from the New York Police Department's Harbor Unit scoured the river. Community volunteers and family members joined the effort, combing the banks and distributing flyers with the boy's photo. Carol took to social media, pleading for information. "Please help find my baby. He's only 2, and I need him home safe." Heart-wrenching posts showed Montrell's cherubic face, igniting public sympathy and media attention from outlets like CBS News and the New York Post. As days turned into a tense wait, authorities zeroed in on Williams as a person of interest. He was located and questioned, initially claiming that Montrell had wandered off during a park visit. But inconsistencies in his story, coupled with the damning video evidence, led to his arrest on May 30th. Charged with second-degree murder, manslaughter, and related offenses, Williams appeared in Bronx criminal court for arraignment. Assistant District Attorney Emily Becker detailed the allegations in a packed courtroom, emphasizing the premeditated nature of the act. "The defendant picked up his own son and threw him into the river like discarded trash," she stated, her words sending murmurs through the gallery. Williams, represented by a public defender, entered a not guilty plea and was remanded without bail due to the flight risk and severity of the charges. Bronx District Attorney Darcel Clark issued a statement condemning the act. "This is a heartbreaking case of a father betraying the most sacred trust. Now, we will seek justice for little Montrell." The boy's body was recovered on June 1st, floating in the East River near Randall's Island, miles downstream from the point of entry. The medical examiner confirmed drowning as the cause of death, with no signs of prior abuse but clear indications that Montrell was conscious upon impact. The discovery brought closure to the search but amplified the family's anguish. Carol, devastated, held a public vigil at a Bronx park where hundreds gathered with candles and teddy bears. "My son deserved to live, to grow up and chase his dreams," she said through tears, flanked by relatives and community leaders. The case drew scrutiny to the New York Police Department's handling of missing child reports, especially in cases involving shared custody. Carol's attorney, Sanford Rubenstein, unannounced plans to sue the city for $60 million, alleging negligence. When Sierra reported her son missing, officers responded with, "So what?" That delay cost a life, Rubenstein told reporters at a press conference on August 8th. As the legal proceedings unfolded, more details emerged about Williams' background. Raised in the Bronx, he had a history of minor brushes with the law, including a domestic dispute with Carol that had prompted her to seek a protective order in the past. Friends described him as overwhelmed by fatherhood, often expressing frustration on social media about the responsibilities. Prosecutors argued this built-up resentment culminated in the fatal decision. In June, a grand jury indicted Williams on the charges, paving the way for trial. Near community organizations like the Bronx Defenders and domestic violence advocates rallied around Carol, highlighting how systemic failures in policing and family courts can exacerbate vulnerabilities. The trial commenced in October of 2025, with jurors hearing graphic testimony from forensic experts who reconstructed the river's currents to explain the body's path. Witnesses included joggers who saw Williams near the bridge and digital forensics specialists who analyzed his phone data, showing searches for river currents hours before the incident. Carol took the stand, her voice steady as she recounted her final moments with Montrell and the agonizing wait for news. The defense portrayed Williams as a young man suffering from untreated mental health issues, possibly depression, and arguing for a lesser charge of manslaughter. But the prosecution's evidence, particularly the video, proved overwhelming. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury convicted Williams on November 15th of second-degree murder and first-degree manslaughter. Sentencing occurred on December 10th, with Judge Miriam Best imposing a term of 25 years to life. You had the power to protect your son, yet you chose to end his life in the most callous way, she declared. William showed remorse in a brief statement, apologizing to Carol and the family. Outside the courthouse, supporters chanted Montrell's name, turning the moment into a call for reform. The lawsuit against the New York Police Department proceeded, with a notice of claim filed for $60.5 million, citing wrongful death and negligence. As of early 2026, settlement discussions are ongoing, but Carroll has vowed to fight for accountability. Montrell's legacy lives on through a foundation in his name, aiding families affected by domestic violence. His story serves as a poignant reminder of the fragility of young lives and the urgent need for vigilant protection. Now we turn to a case that spans states but culminates in New York's shadowed corners, where a forbidden reunion spiraled into obsession and bloodshed. What began as a daughter's quest for her roots unraveled into a web of taboo desires, until a bitter breakup ignited a rampage that claimed multiple lives, exposing the depths of a father's twisted devotion in a tragedy that captivated the nation. Case 8, Stephen Walter Plattel. This disturbing saga traces its origins to the late 1990s in upstate New York, where Stephen Walter Plattel, then a young man in his 20s, and his wife Alyssa, welcomed their first child, a daughter named Denise, on January 16, 1998. Born in a hospital near Poughkeepsie, Denise arrived amid the couple's marital strife. Stephen, described by acquaintances as controlling and volatile, reportedly exhibited abusive behavior toward Alyssa, including physical assaults during her pregnancy. Concerned for the infant's safety, Alyssa made the heart-wrenching decision to place Denise up for adoption shortly after birth. The baby was taken in by a loving couple, Anthony and Kelly Fusco, in Wingdale, New York, who renamed her Katie Rose Fusco. Raised in a stable home in Dutchess County, Katie grew into a vibrant young woman with aspirations of becoming an artist, unaware of the turmoil surrounding her origins. Fast forward to 2016, when Katie, now 18, embarked on a search for her biological parents through social media and ancestry sites. She connected with Stephen and Alyssa, who had divorced years earlier. Stephen, by then 41 and living in Richmond, Virginia, with a new family including 2 younger daughters, eagerly welcomed the reunion. Katie moved in with them that summer, bonding quickly with her half-sisters. However, the dynamic shifted alarmingly. Alyssa later recounted to authorities how Stephen began sleeping on Katie's floor, ostensibly for comfort, but whispers of inappropriate affection grew. By early 2017, Alyssa discovered the pair in an intimate embrace and confronted them. Stephen admitted to a sexual relationship with Katie, leading Alyssa to evict them both. Undeterred, Stephen and Katie relocated to Wakefield, Virginia, where they formalized their union in a Maryland ceremony on July 20th, 2017. Katie wearing a white gown, Stephen in a suit, with his younger daughters as witnesses. Their marriage, illegal due to incest laws, drew scrutiny when neighbors reported suspicious behavior. Katie gave birth to their son, Bennett Kieran Plattel, on September 1st, 2017, in a North Carolina hospital. The family settled in Nightdale, a quiet suburb east of Raleigh, but domestic bliss proved fleeting. In November, Alyssa's anonymous tip to Child Services prompted an investigation. Warrants issued from Henrico County, Virginia, charged Stephen and Katie with incest, adultery, and contributing to delinquency. Arrested on January 27, 2018, they were released on bond with conditions, no contact between them, and Bennett placed temporarily with Stephen's mother, Frances Plattel, in Cary, North Carolina. The separation fueled Stephen's rage. Katie returned to her adoptive parents in New York, ending the relationship via phone on April 11, 2018. That night, Stephen retrieved Bennett from his mother's home under the pretense of a visit. Instead, he smothered the 7-month-old in their Nightdale residence, leaving the body in a closet. The next morning, April 12th, he drove north in his blue minivan, armed with an AR-15 style rifle. Arriving in New Milford, in Connecticut, around 7 in the morning, he ambushed Katie and Anthony Fusco as they left for a routine errand. From his vehicle, Stephen fired multiple rounds into their Honda Accord at an intersection on Route 7, killing both instantly. Witnesses described the scene as chaotic, with shattered glass and blood staining the roadway. New Milford Police Chief Sean Boyne held a press conference, confirming the victims' identities and linking the attack to domestic motives. Stephen then fled across the state line into Dutchess County, New York. Around 8:45 that morning, he called his mother, confessing to the murders. "I killed the baby, Katie, and her father." Frances, horrified, dialed 911, her voice trembling in the recorded call. "He told me he killed his baby. And he's in the house." Nightdale police discovered Bennett's body during a welfare check at 9 in the morning. His death ruled a homicide by asphyxiation. Meanwhile, a multi-agency manhunt tracked Stephen's van to a rural road in Dover, New York. Officers found him inside, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The weapon matched the one used in Connecticut. News outlets like CBS News, BBC, and the New York Times covered the spree extensively, dubbing it a family annihilation rooted in incest and revenge. Katie's adoptive mother, Kelly Fusco, spoke at a memorial service in Wingdale, remembering her daughter as compassionate and artistic. "Katie brought light to everyone she met. This monster took that away." Stephen's ex-wife Alyssa expressed relief mixed with sorrow, noting his history of abuse. Investigations revealed Stephen's online posts glorifying their relationship, including wedding photos shared on social media under pseudonyms. Prosecutors in multiple jurisdictions closed the case with his death, but the fallout prompted reviews of adoption reunion protocols and incest law enforcement. A joint funeral for Katie, Anthony, and Bennett was held on April 21st in upstate New York, attended by hundreds. Mourners released balloons in their honor, and a GoFundMe raised funds for the Fusco family. The tragedy highlighted the dangers of unregulated family reunions and untreated mental health issues. Frances Plattel, grappling with guilt, advocated for awareness in interviews. As of 2026, the case remains a benchmark in true crime discussions. With documentaries and podcasts like those on A&E and Apple Podcasts, recounting the descent from reunion to ruin. Stephen's actions, born of forbidden obsession, left a trail of devastation across states, forever scarring those left behind. Case 9, James Yurden. The unraveling of this disturbing case traces back to the quiet town of Adams Center in Jefferson County, a place where rolling hills and small-town charm belie the potential for hidden horrors. James Yurden, a 55-year-old man known in some circles as Pappy Jim, had built a life that appeared rooted in community and spirituality. As a figure affiliated with a Norse pagan retreat, he presented himself as a guide and mentor, often engaging with local groups and attending events that fostered a sense of belonging. But beneath this exterior lay accusations that would shock those who knew him, leading to his indictment in early February of 2026 on charges that painted a far darker portrait. According to announcements from the Albany County District Attorney's Office and the New York State Police Troop G, Yurden was formally charged with preying on children for his own gratification. The sealed 4-count indictment, unsealed during his arraignment on February 2nd before the Honorable Roger McDonough in Albany County Court, included 1 count of predatory sexual assault against a child, 1 count of sexual abuse in the second degree, and 2 counts of endangering the welfare of a child. Prosecutors alleged that Yurden had raped a male victim who was less than 11 years old on several occasions between March of 2023 and May of 2025. These incidents reportedly occurred at multiple locations within Albany County and extended to other areas across the state, suggesting a calculated pattern that allowed him to evade immediate detection. The indictment further detailed that Yurden sexually abused another male victim, this one less than 14 years old, in the town of Colony during late January of 2025. Colony, a suburban area just outside Albany known for its family-friendly neighborhoods and shopping districts, became an unlikely backdrop for such allegations. State police investigators, who had been building the case for months, expressed concerns that there could be additional victims, urging anyone with information to come forward. Yurden's connections to a church in Watertown and his role in the Norse pagan community raised questions about whether his position of influence had been used to gain access to vulnerable individuals. Authorities noted that he attended events where children were present, amplifying the potential scope of the probe. Yurden's arrest stemmed from a collaborative effort involving local law enforcement and federal agencies, as he was already in custody facing separate federal charges related to child pornography possession. This overlap highlighted the broader digital footprint that often accompanies such offenses, with investigators combing through electronic devices and online activities to piece together the timeline. During his court appearance, Yurden entered a plea of not guilty, standing stoically as the charges were read aloud. The courtroom, filled with reporters from outlets like the Times-Union and News 10 ABC, buzzed with the gravity of the moment. Albany County District Attorney Lee Kinlan addressed the media afterward, emphasizing the commitment to justice. This individual is accused of betraying the trust placed in him as a community member, exploiting children who deserve protection. Kinlan's words echoed the sentiment of many in the region, where the news sent ripples through religious and social circles. As details emerged, community members in Adams Center in Albany County grappled with the revelations. Neighbors described Yurden as unassuming, someone who kept to himself but participated in local gatherings. One resident, speaking anonymously to Syracuse.com, recalled seeing him at events but noted nothing overtly suspicious at the time. The Norse pagan retreat he was linked to issued a statement distancing itself from the allegations, clarifying that any affiliation was informal and that they condemned such acts unequivocally. Advocacy groups, including those focused on survivors of clergy and institutional abuse, pointed to the case as a reminder of how predators can infiltrate trusted spaces. Websites like victimcivilattorneys.com compiled resources for potential victims, noting that institutions enabling abuse could face civil liability. The investigation began when reports surfaced in 2025, prompted by disclosures from the victims or their guardians. State police conducted interviews, gathered forensic evidence, and coordinated with federal authorities to build an airtight case. Yurden's federal charges, handled separately, involved allegations of possessing illicit materials, which prosecutors suggested corroborated the state-level accusations. In court, assistant district attorneys outlined the timeline, stressing the repeated nature of the offenses and the vulnerability of the young boys involved. Bail was denied due to the severity of the charges and the risk of flight, with Yurden remanded to custody pending trial. As the case progresses toward trial, expected in the latter half of 2026, legal experts anticipate a focus on witness testimonies and digital forensics. Defense attorneys have remained tight-lipped, but sources indicate they may challenge the credibility of the allegations or argue for reduced charges based on mitigating factors. For the victims' families, the path to healing is arduous, supported by counseling services and community outreach. Albany County's Child Advocacy Center has been instrumental in providing a safe space for disclosures, underscoring the importance of such resources in rural and suburban areas. Yurden's story has sparked broader conversations about vetting community leaders and educating parents on signs of grooming, with workshops held in Jefferson and Albany counties in response. This case, unfolding in the shadow of New York's capital, serves as a stark illustration of how abuse can persist undetected in everyday settings. As authorities continue to appeal for information, the hope is that justice will not only hold Yurden accountable, but also prevent future harm. The boys at the center of the indictment, now receiving support, represent the resilience amid tragedy, their bravery in coming forward a beacon for others. Shifting our lens now to the bustling streets of Brooklyn, where digital shadows hide real-world dangers, a seemingly ordinary man's online pursuits masked a web of exploitation that crossed state lines, until a hurricane season rendezvous led to his capture, unraveling a years-long scheme that ensnared dozens of young victims and culminated in a sentence that reflected the depth of his depravity. Case 10, Matthew Gabriel Bergeda. In the vibrant yet anonymous world of Brooklyn's neighborhoods, Matthew Gabriel Bergeda, a 34-year-old resident, blended into the urban tapestry with a life that appeared unremarkable on the surface. Living in an apartment amid the borough's eclectic mix of cultures and communities, Bergeda held down everyday routines, but his digital life told a far more sinister story. Federal prosecutors from the Northern District of Florida, in collaboration with Homeland Security investigations, would later reveal how Birgitta had been sexually exploiting children online since at least 2019, using social media and messaging apps to groom and coerce vulnerable minors across the country. The turning point came during the tumultuous days of Hurricane Idalia in late August of 2023, when the storm battered Florida's Gulf Coast with fierce winds and flooding. Undeterred by the weather warnings and evacuation orders, Birgitta boarded a flight from New York to Tallahassee, then drove southward to Perry, a small town in Taylor County known for its pine forests and coastal proximity. His purpose was far from seeking shelter. Instead, he had arranged to meet a 13-year-old girl he had been communicating with online for months. Prosecutors detailed how Birgitta enticed the minor with promises and manipulations, convincing her to send explicit images and videos of herself. On the day of his arrival, amid the hurricane's outer bands, he checked into a local motel, awaiting the encounter. The girl's mother, growing suspicious of her daughter's secretive behavior, discovered the communications and immediately alerted the Perry Police Department. Officers acted swiftly, coordinating with federal agents to set up surveillance. When Birgitta attempted to make contact, law enforcement intervened, arresting him at the motel without incident. A search of his iPhone, conducted under warrant, uncovered a trove of child sexual abuse material, not just involving the Florida girl, but depicting over 20 other children he had exploited over the years. The images and videos stored on his device showed a pattern of coercion where Birgitta posed as a peer or authority figure to solicit explicit content, often escalating to demands for in-person meetings. Even after his arrest, Birgitta's attempts to cover his tracks continued. While detained in the Taylor County Jail, he made recorded phone calls to family and friends, instructing an associate in Brooklyn to dispose of hard drives and other storage devices hidden in his apartment. This directive, while captured on jailhouse recordings, provided additional evidence of his consciousness of guilt and the extent of his digital archive. Federal investigators raided the Brooklyn residence, recovering further materials that corroborated the phone's contents. The case quickly expanded into a multi-jurisdictional effort, with Homeland Security Investigations Tallahassee leading the charge, assisted by the United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Florida. Birgitta was indicted on multiple federal counts, including sexual exploitation of children, enticement of a minor, travel with intent to engage in illicit sexual conduct, transportation of child sexual abuse material, and possession of child sexual abuse material. Facing overwhelming evidence, he entered a guilty plea in early 2024, in avoiding a trial that would have exposed even more graphic details to the public. Media coverage from outlets like WCTV, ICE.gov, and the Department of Justice's press releases highlighted the interstate nature of his crimes, noting how he preyed on children from various states, leveraging the anonymity of the internet. Sentencing occurred on July 31, 2024, in a federal courtroom in Tallahassee. United States District Judge Alan Windsor handed down a term of 480 months, equivalent to 40 years, in federal prison, followed by a lifetime of supervised release. The judge cited the premeditated travel during a natural disaster as particularly egregious, stating that Birgitta's actions demonstrated a blatant disregard for the victim's well-being and public safety. Prosecutor Jason Cootie emphasized the collaborative law enforcement effort. This sentence sends a clear message that those who exploit children will be pursued relentlessly, no matter where they hide. Birgitta, appearing subdued in court, offered no public statement, but court documents noted his attempts to minimize the offenses during plea negotiations. The victims, scattered across the nation, ranged in age from preteens to early teenagers, many of whom were identified through forensic analysis of the seized materials. Support services, including those from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, were mobilized to assist in their recovery. Birgitta's case drew attention to the perils of online grooming, prompting awareness campaigns in Brooklyn schools and Florida communities. Parents in Perry, still recovering from the hurricane's physical toll, expressed gratitude for the quick response that prevented further harm. One local resident, interviewed by CBS 12, remarked on the irony of a predator braving a storm to commit his crimes, underscoring the determination behind such acts. In New York, the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office monitored the federal proceedings, ready to pursue any state-level charges if needed. though the federal sentence rendered that unlikely. Brigida's apartment, once a hub for his illicit activities, was cleared out, its contents serving as evidence in the broader fight against child exploitation. As he begins his lengthy incarceration, experts like those from the Department of Justice's Project Safe Childhood Initiative continue to use his case in training sessions for investigators, often highlighting red flags in digital communications. This final case closes our examination of paternal figures whose actions defied the bonds of family, leaving scars on New York's landscape. Brigida's story, like the others, underscores the vigilance required in an increasingly connected world. As we conclude this series on Echo Case File Channel, thank you for joining us through these compelling narratives. If you've been captivated by the depth of these true stories, please like this video, share your reflections in the comments, and hit that subscribe button to stay updated on our future explorations into the world of true crime.